The skyscrapers are standing, let that be clear. The Burj Khalifa stands, the Marina Towers stand, but something else is falling. Something never made of glass or steel. Something no THAAD battery can protect and no Lloyd's policy can cover. The idea is falling. The 40-year idea that this city was different, that here, the missiles stopped, that regional wars were something you watched from a rooftop bar, not something that arrived while you were eating iftar with your family. That idea is taking direct hits. And ideas, unlike skyscrapers, have no air defense systems. To understand what Iran hit on February 28, 2026, you first have to understand what Dubai had been selling for 40 years, because the target was not the buildings. The target was never the buildings. Dubai's founding commercial logic was simple, and it was brilliant. The Middle East is unstable. Capital hates instability. Therefore, build a stable place in the middle of the instability and charge the capital a premium to exist there. The product was not a skyline. The product was not a tax structure. The product was not even the Golden Visa or the DIFC or the Emirates Frequent Flyer program. The product was immunity. The perception, carefully constructed, expensively maintained, aggressively marketed, that Dubai occupied a different category than the rest of the region. That Beirut could burn, and Dubai would host the Lebanese capital's displaced bankers. That Syria could collapse, and Dubai would provide the Syrian merchant class with a new address. That Iran and Saudi Arabia could spend decades in cold proxy conflict, and Dubai would happily take money from both sides simultaneously. That Russia could invade Ukraine, and Dubai would absorb the capital flight from Moscow and Kyiv with equal professionalism and zero political judgment. The immunity was never legal. It was never guaranteed by treaty or underwritten by a superpower alliance in the explicit way that, say, a NATO member's security is underwritten. It was constructed from behavior, from consistency, from the accumulated evidence of 40 years in which the regional catastrophes kept happening and Dubai kept not being one of them. By February 2026, the evidence base was extensive. Dubai had survived the Lebanese Civil War, the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War, the Second Intifada, the Iraq War, the Arab Spring, the Syrian Civil War, the Yemen War, the periodic eruptions of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the US-Iran maximum pressure campaign, and a global pandemic. Through all of it, the city had kept the airport open, the stock exchange trading, the beaches populated, and the service charges flowing. The track record was the product. And the track record was destroyed on a Saturday afternoon in February when Iran decided that 40 years of Dubai's behavioral immunity was not a fact of nature, but a calculation, and that the calculation had changed. The strikes of February 28, 2026 did not arrive without warning. They arrived without being taken seriously, which is a different thing entirely. Iran had been explicit for years, explicit in the way that authoritarian states are explicit, through official statements, through proxy communications, through the carefully constructed public declarations of military commanders who understood that their words were being transcribed and analyzed in every intelligence agency from Langley to Tel Aviv to Riyadh. The message was consistent. If Iran was struck on its own territory, every American military asset in the region was a legitimate target. Every country hosting those assets was a combatant. The WUA hosts Al Dhafra Air Base. It hosts one of the most significant concentrations of American air power outside the continental United States, F-35s, surveillance aircraft, tanker capacity, and the support infrastructure for approximately 2,000 American personnel. The WUA had built its security architecture around American military presence while simultaneously building its commercial architecture around the claim of political neutrality. That contradiction was sustainable for as long as Iran chose not to exploit it. For years, Iran chose not to. The commercial relationship between Iran and Dubai, the hundreds of thousands of Iranian nationals living in the way, the informal trade networks, the gold markets, the cash economy that moved quietly between the two countries across the Gulf, was more valuable to Iran than the military calculus of striking the UA. Then, Operation Roaring Lion changed the calculus. The US-Israeli operation that struck Iran's nuclear infrastructure, military command centers, and air defense networks on February 27th was not a warning shot. It was a systematic degradation of Iran's strategic capabilities. The strikes were extensive, they were precise, and they crossed the line that Iranian leadership had drawn publicly, repeatedly, and without ambiguity for 2 decades. Iran's response was not a surprise, it was a schedule. The only question had always been what would be on the target list when the schedule arrived. The answer was Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and the American base that the UAE had been diplomatically pretending was not a legitimate military target, while commercially pretending that hosting it carried no risk. On February 28th, both pretenses ended simultaneously. The missiles began arriving at approximately 2 p.m. local time on Saturday, February 28th. The timing was not accidental. 2 p.m. on a Saturday in late February is the peak of peak season in Dubai. Ramadan had begun, which in Dubai's luxury hospitality economy means full hotels, crowded beach clubs operating on special Ramadan schedules, restaurants fully booked for iftar, and the Palm Jumeirah hosting its standard weekend carousel of European visitors who had specifically chosen February to escape the cold, and who had specifically chosen Dubai because Dubai was the safe option. The WUA air defense network, layers of THAAD, Patriot PAC-3, and shorter-range systems activated immediately. The response was by any military standard impressive. Of the 174 ballistic missiles Iran fired, 161 were intercepted. Of the 689 drones, 645 were destroyed. Of the 8 cruise missiles, most were neutralized before reaching their targets. Most, not all. 13 ballistic missiles reached the ground. 44 drones impacted. 3 cruise missiles found their targets or were close enough that the distinction between a hit and a near miss became commercially irrelevant. 3 people were killed. A Pakistani national died when falling debris struck a residential area near Al Dhafra Air Base. To the 4 million people living through it, considerably longer. 58 people were injured. The medical response was swift and professional. The UAE's emergency services, trained and equipped at a level commensurate with one of the wealthiest states on earth, performed exactly as designed. The civilian shelter system, the emergency broadcast network, the protocols for telling 4 million people who had moved to Dubai specifically to escape conflict, where to go and what to do when the missiles arrived. There were no public shelters. Dubai had built exactly 0 designated public blast shelters in 40 years of existence as a major city. The logic had been impeccable, and it had been wrong. You do not build shelters in a city that has sold immunity as its primary product. It would have been the city acknowledging, in concrete and steel, the possibility it had spent 4 decades denying. So Dubai had no shelters. And 4 million people spent the night of February 28th in underground parking garages, telling their children that the explosions overhead were Ramadan fireworks. The WUA Ministry of Defense published its damage assessment, because Iran, whatever its failures in other domains, understood precisely what Dubai was, and precisely what needed to be struck to cause maximum damage to what Dubai actually valued. The Fairmont Hotel, Palm Jumeirah, a kamikaze drone, direct impact, fire visible from across the water on a clear February evening, photographed by 1,000 phones before the fire trucks arrived, uploaded to every social platform simultaneously, shared globally before any official statement was issued. 4 injured. The building repairable. The image permanent. The Burj Al Arab, the 830-foot sail-shaped hotel that is the single most recognizable structure in the Middle East. More recognizable than any mosque, any fort, any ancient structure the region possesses. Because the Burj Al Arab is the symbol specifically of Dubai's modernity, specifically of its ambition, specifically of the proposition that this city was different. Debris from an intercepted missile struck its facade. Smoke. Images. The symbol of Dubai's promise with smoke rising from it. Dubai International Airport, Terminal 3, the world's busiest international hub. The physical infrastructure of Dubai's geographic advantage, the 8-hour radius, the position at the center of 2/3 of the world's population. Smoke-filled corridors, evacuating passengers filming themselves leaving. The machinery that made Dubai the mandatory transit node for global capital, briefly, visibly, unmistakably compromised. Jebel Ali Port, the trade artery, the conduit through which the goods economy of Dubai, the re-export model that had made the city the commercial hub of a region stretching from East Africa to South Asia, flows. A berth on fire, black smoke for 20 miles. The physical evidence that the trade model carried a vulnerability its pricing had never reflected. The U.S. consulate, the American flag above a smoke, damaged building in the city that had claimed political neutrality while hosting the American military infrastructure that made neutrality a fiction. Al Dhafra Air Base. The reason for everything else. The American military presence that had made the UAE a combatant in a conflict its commercial brand had positioned it as a bystander too. Iran was not trying to destroy Dubai. Iran was trying to destroy the idea of Dubai. And it understood, with the precision of a country that had studied its target for 40 years, exactly which images would do the most damage. Not the industrial port, not the power grid, not the desalination plants, the hotel shaped like a sail, the airport arrivals board, the American flag. Iran struck the symbols because Iran understood that symbols were all Dubai actually had. The first 72 hours after February 28th produced a documentary record of what happens when a confidence economy loses confidence. The beaches emptied within an hour of the first explosions. On the best beach weekend of the best tourist month of the city's calendar year, the sand cleared. The beach clubs closed their doors. The hotel pools sent their guests inside. The yacht charters returned to their berths. The grocery delivery apps crashed under demand volumes they had never been designed to handle, because Dubai had never before experienced the specific consumer behavior of a population panic, buying simultaneously. The shelves of the hypermarkets, the Carrefours and Spinneys and Lulus that served the city's 4 million residents cleared within hours of categories that had never been in shortage before. Water, canned goods, batteries, the products of anxiety. 21,300 flights were canceled across 7 UAE airports in the first several days. The arrivals board at Dubai International, the board that had displayed the destinations of a connected world, the visual proof that this airport was the center of everything, went dark in sections. Emirates Airlines, the carrier that had been the physical manifestation of Dubai's geographic promise, was running evacuation flights, moving people out, not in. The Abu Dhabi and Dubai stock exchanges closed, both of them, for 2 consecutive trading days. That had never happened in the history of UAE financial markets. Not in 2008, not in 2020. The exchanges had stayed open through every previous crisis, because staying open was itself a statement, a declaration that the commercial machinery of Dubai was uninterrupted. The closure was the statement inverted. It was the commercial machinery saying, for the first time, we need a moment. Investment firms paused fundraising. Banks reported technical disruptions. Amazon Web Services outages cascaded through the financial sector. Physical gold demand surged. The dirham, pegged to the dollar, held because the peg is structural and the UAE's reserves are substantial, but the assets denominated in dirhams moved in ways that the peg could not stabilize. And through all of it, the 300,000 British nationals in the UAE watched their foreign secretary establish emergency repatriation support within 48 hours. The Indians watched Air India expand its evacuation capacity. The Americans were quietly advised that the consulate was temporarily closed and that services were available via alternative channels. The city that had sold itself as the place everyone was trying to get into had become, in 72 hours, the place everyone was trying to get out of. Here is what the missiles exposed that was already true before the first one was fired. Dubai's capital base had been quietly, incrementally, partially repositioning for months before February 28th. Not in dramatic ways, not in the ways that produce headlines or trigger market movements. In the quiet ways that mobile capital always moves. Through the portfolio rebalancing decisions of family offices, through the lease renewal decisions of multinational firms, through the visa application decisions of wealthy individuals who had been watching the Iran-US tension escalate through 2025 and making private calculations that their public statements did not reflect. A portfolio manager does not announce that they are reducing their Dubai exposure. They simply reduce it. An Indian family office does not hold a press conference to explain that they are diversifying into Singapore. They open a Singapore entity and begin moving assets. A Russian oligarch does not publish a statement explaining that the February threat environment has accelerated their Malta timeline. They call their lawyer. This is how capital flight begins. Not with a bang, with a series of phone calls that nobody reports on and nobody tallies until the aggregate shows up in the data 6 months later. The February 28th strikes accelerated a process that had already started. They did not create the process. The Iran-US confrontation had been building throughout 2025 in ways that any serious risk analyst had been pricing into their models. The strikes simply converted the private calculations into public ones, making it socially and professionally acceptable to say aloud what many had been thinking quietly. The question is not whether capital left Dubai after February 28th. Some did. The question is whether the leaving becomes self-reinforcing, whether the firms that stay begin to feel the absence of the firms that left, whether the residential towers that were already 25% empty begin to feel the departure of the 75% who were there, whether the restaurants and hotels and retail that serve the wealthy expatriate community begin to feel the reduction in the client base that sustained them. Beirut's collapse was not a single event. It was a cascade. Each departure made the next departure more rational. Each closed business made the surrounding businesses less viable. Each empty apartment lowered the social density that made the remaining residents want to stay. Dubai is not Beirut. The financial reserves are incomparable. The federal structure of the way provides a backstop that Lebanon never had. Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund, one of the largest in the world, can absorb shocks that would be fatal to a less resourced state. But the cascade logic does not require insolvency to cause damage. It only requires the calculation to shift. And on February 28, 2026, in every family office and hedge fund and wealth management firm and private banking relationship that had Dubai exposure, the calculation shifted. While Dubai was processing what had happened, 5 cities were making phone calls: Singapore, Zurich, London, Lisbon, Malta. None of these cities is Dubai. None of them offers the tax efficiency, the geographic centrality, the infrastructure scale, or the sheer brazen ambition that Dubai had assembled over 40 years. Singapore is the closest competitor on the financial architecture, English common law, low taxes, excellent infrastructure, genuine political stability, but Singapore lacks the emotional drama of Dubai. The sense that you are living in the future being constructed in real time. Zurich is stable to the point of tranquility. London has taxes. Lisbon and Malta have limitations of scale. None of them can replace Dubai for the specific category of mobile capital that had chosen Dubai because Dubai was simultaneously tax efficient and exciting, financially sophisticated and architecturally spectacular, strategically located and reliably safe. But they don't need to replace Dubai completely. They only need to absorb the marginal decision. The family that was 80% committed to Dubai and is now 60% committed. The hedge fund that was planning a DIFC expansion and is now planning a simultaneous Singapore presence as a hedge against the hedge. The British millionaire who was about to apply for the golden visa and is now taking one more year to watch how the situation develops. The marginal decision is where cities are won and lost. Dubai built itself on the marginal decisions of people fleeing Beirut, fleeing Moscow, fleeing London's tax regime. The same logic now runs in the other direction, and the cities watching from the sidelines understand exactly what they are watching for. They are watching for the moment when the marginal decision tips. When enough people make the slightly different choice that the network effects begin to compound in the wrong direction. When the hedge fund that moved to Singapore discovers that the talent it needs is also moving to Singapore, and the talent discovers that the fund it wants to work for is in Singapore, and the cycle that built Dubai begins to build somewhere else. That moment has not arrived. Whether it arrives depends entirely on how long the conflict continues, on whether